of Jackrabbit to go down Scottsdale Road. So, yeah, because it's in a dip. Are we ready? All right. Good evening, everyone. Our monsoon, notice the singular. Our summer monsoon struck today. So I'm thankful for all of you who swam to get here, and thank you, virtual audience, for watching it. And thank you, authors who traveled in to do this. So our host tonight is Meg Gardiner, author of the Unsub series and also of Heat. Heat 1 and 2.
Heat 2.
Sorry?
Heat 2.
1 and 2, right? Oh, no, it was Heat and then Heat 2. Oh, sorry. Got it. All right. And read Farrel Coleman, whom we have seen in many iterations over many years with very many series, and one of our favorite writers. And over here, Steve Hamilton, whom we haven't seen 6 years, has it been? Right. But Steve was here for his very first book and has been here, except for the co-authored books. You've been here for every one of your books, so we're particularly delighted to have him. So Meg is going to be doing the questioning tonight. I'm going to go sit in the audience, which I think is a wonderful experience. I love it. So here we go.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks, everybody. She started to introduce them. I will give a bit more, and then I'm going to ask you guys to describe yourselves. You're both award-winning authors, New York Times best-selling authors with long careers. The similarities go on, but describe yourself. Tell the people who you are. Read.
That's an interesting thing to describe yourself. I was born in Brooklyn, and many of my books are set in Brooklyn. But I write hard-boiled and noir, and the best compliment I ever got about my writing was from Eddie Muller. Do you watch Turner Classic Movies? Noir Alley, that's Eddie Muller. I once said, Eddie, I don't really write noir. And he said, Reed, your books are so noir. And I said, why? He said, because the truth always makes things worse. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, I was born in Detroit, and some Michiganders here. And my first 7 books, I guess, were set in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, because at the time it seemed like a good idea to try to set a noir book. I mean, we talk about noir, it's usually the kind of thing that happens in a city, or Brooklyn, or New York, or Los Angeles, if you go back to Chandler and everything. And I just thought, what about like in the middle of freaking nowhere, up on Lake Superior, to have, because it's a pretty noir place. It's pretty cold anyway. And so that was how I got started with that first book, which was A Cold Day in Paradise. And I was right here with that, 98, 99. And how many years later is it? I just,
Many.
It's great to be back. I can't imagine writing a book and not coming back here.
You talked about noir. I will give both of your new thrillers noir cred. They are thrillers. They are action-packed. They are people are on the run. The truth does hurt everybody in these stories, but they are big in scope. So many people in danger, the heroes having to fight their way free of every bit of peril and rescuing people and figure out what's going on. So they're both Blind to Midnight and An Honorable Assassin are beautifully constructed. They are, they've got mystery involved in it. They've got complicated heroes, but the pace just is beautifully relentless and just carries you through from page 1 till you're breathlessly wrapping it up. In some ways, there are some similarities. I want to talk about that, but the books are so individual and distinct that we're going to have fun looking at that as well. Blind to Midnight takes place
in New York.
and An Honorable Assassin takes place
in Indonesia and Singapore and the Philippines, of course.
Steve wins.
So it's not surprising to say that nowadays that that a city, that the setting is a character in a book. For something that for Americans is so seemingly familiar as New York City, how do you bring it to life in such a specific and fresh way?
Well, you use the right word, specific. I say New York is not one. What's funny is you're exactly right. People have a sense that they know New York until they go there, and they tend to think of New York as Manhattan. But I grew up in Coney Island. In fact, this tattoo on my arm is of a ride in Coney Island, and my kids have it too. Because I made them get it.
Okay.
No.
Did Dad force them to be tattooed?
No.
Okay, this is going on the live stream for everybody out there.
That's not true. In fact, they were the ones who made me get this. So, New York is not one city; it's 1,000 cities. In fact, from neighborhood to neighborhood, and this is true of any big city. I'm sure that's true in Detroit. From neighborhood to neighborhood, it's a different city. I grew up in this area in Brooklyn that's an amusement park, basically. And it's right on the Atlantic Ocean. And then the neighborhoods next to it, Brighton Beach and Sheepshead Bay, are one of them is a fishing village. So no one ever thinks of New York as that. So why New York is always a fresh place to write about is these are places that people actually don't know, although they think they know New York.
And in your book, the hero is an NYPD detective. He is New York. He's embedded there. He's from there. His family is generations long in New York City. In An Honorable Assassin, Nick Mason has the absolute opposite.
He's kind of opposite, yeah. Nick Mason, just to pick up with Nick Mason, I mean, we talked about Michigan and the UP and Alex. Nick Mason was a character that came along later. The first book was the Second Life of Nick Mason, and it was set in Chicago. And it was a real departure in that this was really the first time I wrote about. I mean, I wrote about a criminal in The Lock Artist, a young guy with this talent for locks, and how he sort of was pulled into a life of crime. But Nick is just a criminal, a professional. Started out as a car thief, worked his way up, and he ends up in prison, and he makes this deal in that first book, that because all he wants to do is to get out and get back with his ex-wife and his daughter. So there was this humanity about him, but the deal that he made getting out of that long prison stretch is that anytime the phone rings, he has to answer it and do whatever he's told. So really, that first book is about living in that vice grip of having to serve this master, having sold his soul to this guy named Darius Cole. And the second book was Exit Strategy, which you could sort of tell by the title was him trying to get out of that. And by the end of that book, you sort of, I won't give away the ending, but you sort of think, okay, maybe he's found his freedom finally. And it turns out sometimes you just trade one master for another. And that's why at the end of that book, he was literally on a plane to Jakarta, which is the most far-flung place I could imagine. And so this book literally takes place, page 1, he gets off the plane in Jakarta. And everything that happens after that is just, you said, you're talking about pacing and about action. I mean, I think Reed and I both try to do that. I think our best compliment that we can get is that you just had to, you started it and you just had to keep reading, and you stayed up all night, and you were wrecked the next day, and your day at work was lousy. That's like the best thing that we can hear.
In fact, my writing is lousy because I was reading the book, and I got. No, what's funny is we all have the same agent, and he requires us to have a protagonist named Nick. By the way.
Okay, Nick Ryan, Nick Mason.
Right.
I'm working on a Nikki. We'll see what we got here. So, you mentioned the one thing that is aligns between your two characters, the criminal, the cop. You said that Mason is he's forced to serve a criminal master, someone above him. Nick Ryan has found himself in a bit of the same situation. He's a homicide detective. He loves the NYPD. He's sworn to the blue, but he has also put himself in a position where he's now become a fixer for the nebulous forces that really run the city. So in both these books, both your heroes are they're prisoners of their past and their bad choices, right?
Just like us. Yes.
Go on,
Yes.
right?
No. Yes. No. Nick is definitely a prisoner now. He doesn't realize it yet, really, in that he's taken this job on as the city's fixer, or I like to think of as the city's watchman. So the messes are made by the city, and the solutions are his. And he has pretty much free reign to solve the problems however he chooses to. However, he has to be given the assignment. And so he serves a master, and he has a handler, but he really doesn't know who his masters are. And you see through In Blind to Midnight that he's trying to kind of find out who these people are, who give him the orders and tell him what to do.
Right.
But I won't tell you what.
And
It's amazing how similar that just that one thread is in these two books, because Nick Mason, obviously, very different life, very different skill set of what he does, and yet he's also serving a master, and ultimately he also doesn't really know who's really up there, who he's really working for. So that mystery is sort of, it's a big part of the book of the series that becomes much more prevalent in this book. But I mean, this is, talk about Nicks, and by the way, my son is named Nick, so it's a great name.
And I'm a fan of the Knicks, so
But I just want to, if Nick Ryan is such, I just want to say something about Nick Ryan, your character. It's what a great idea. It's like, how does that first line go on the jacket copy of the first book? Is that like, when you're in trouble, you call 911?
When the cops are in trouble, they call Nick Ryan.
Right. That's like perfect. That is a perfect way to sort of set the tone, just the tuning fork for a series, and it's just been a great series to read.
Thank you.
And I hope you keep going with it too, because
Me too.
right. Okay, talked a bit about the characters, about the setting, the stories. They're both big, very personal, but they seem to start. Yours could have started. Well, no, neither of them start small. Mason's getting off a plane in Jakarta. He knows he's going to be driven somewhere to kill someone almost instantly. Yours, Blind to Midnight, starts.
Well, with the biggest event that's happened in New York City in a very long time, 9/11.
Right. So it's about. Do you want to tell him, or shall I?
Sure. Nick is given I will let me do this as briefly as I can. On 9/11, of course, everybody knows about the terrorist attacks and the 3,000 people who were killed. But there was one homicide in Brooklyn on 9/11 that's never been solved, that had nothing to do with the terrorist attacks.
And it was the only homicide.
Only homicide in New York
City.
City on that day. And the person's name was Henryk Sywiak. He was a Polish immigrant. And the narrative is that he was fully bearded. He spoke with a full accent, a very thick accent. He got lost on his way to work in Brooklyn. And the working theory is people were very angry, as you can imagine, in New York City that day. They mistook him for a Muslim and murdered him. but it's never been solved. And so that has always fascinated me. This cold case has always fascinated me. Now, my story is not Henrik Cyriak's story, but it was a jumping off point for me.
And it turns out that Nick Mason lands in Indonesia and is given a target who is
his name is Hashim Baya. This is really the first book where he's got one thing to do. Really the first couple of books he's got to, that's part of the whole setup of the series is that he never knows what's going to come next. The phone's going to ring and he has to go out and do whatever. This time he pretty much knows what he has to do. There's one person that he has to take out. So it seems pretty simple, but this guy it's not so easy to do because his nickname is the Crocodile, because his last name is sort of a play on word for the Indonesian word for crocodile is very similar to Baya, so that's how he got that nickname, although it kind of fits anyway just because of the kind of person he is. They have these amazing 20-foot saltwater crocodiles there. So if the guy you're looking for is named after that, you know you're in for an interesting trip. And for the first time, Nick sets out to do something, and he totally fails. And he doesn't get his guy. And then he has to try again, and he fails again. And all the while this is happening, his family is still in that same mortal danger that they've been in ever since the first book. So now it's just getting more and more acute, and he feels like more and more desperate that he has to find a way to make this happen.
Yeah, so they've got pressure. Both your heroes have pressure from all sides. That Mason is after a very bad guy. Baya he's a terrorist financier.
Yeah,
right.
He's essentially treats terror as a commodity, and he invests in it, and he directs it. And I started writing this before, things happened in Ukraine and elsewhere. We don't have to, go into that, but it kind of felt kind of weirdly timely that terror and this violence really is kind of like something that people use as a tool, as just another kind of weapon, and it's kind of a sickening thought, but that's the kind of guy this guy is.
And Ryan, again, he doesn't know. He's given an assignment,
But he doesn't know why.
He's told to solve this cold case from now 22 years ago, 3 years ago. And it's not as simple as it seems.
What's funny is both Nick Mason and Nick Ryan are incredibly competent at what they do, and that's why they get the jobs they get. And my previous books, my previous characters, and I've written a lot of series. I'll get it right eventually. I write about stumblers. Stumblers are easy to write about because they're people who, let's say they were uniformed cops and they were good as uniformed cops, but they were never detectives. They never had the training. So they often do wrong things. And people who do wrong things put themselves in interesting and dangerous situations, whereas competent people, right, don't generally do that. But both Nicks get in. Just because they're competent in what they do doesn't mean they will always be able to tread water and keep the water above their head, below their heads. And so I think in both of these books, both characters, as competent as they are, run into that, we're in trouble.
Well, they're both extremely competent, but they both are in extremely uncomfortable and dangerous positions that they've put themselves in. Right? They're both, they've got these pasts, and they have both made a devil's bargain basically to get the jobs that they have, and they haven't been forced into them, but people keep
the original act that put them in that position was certainly voluntary, but it's the consequences of that are things that you never could have imagined.
And what's funny is. Nick comes back. No, my Nick comes back from Afghanistan after doing 2 tours in Afghanistan to find out he has a family he didn't know about, and a daughter and
competent
and and now, just like Nick Mason, He has a family to protect, whom he loves, but can't be with them because they could become collateral damage. So they're both in that position of they have to do their jobs now, not only because they chose to do their jobs, but because there are other stakes. There's more at stake now than when they originally got involved.
And Nick Mason's family is actually, they don't know it, but they're being held hostage.
They don't. His family, who are very much a part of the first two books, they're 10,000 miles away in this book, and yet they're still under the same threat. Even if they don't really realize it, as you say, it doesn't matter. Nick knows it. Nick knows it. If he fails, they're going to show up at that house way back in Colorado, and something bad's going to happen. And they even show him like a closed circuit TV, like a little video feed, just in case there's any doubt.
It's the worst HGTV in history. There's like this beautiful house with the cameras all over it, and he knows that there may be men outside the door coming in to take
What's
out his
amazing is we didn't speak to each other while we were doing these books. And there's a scene in Blind to Midnight where someone shows Nick his former girlfriend and their child in a park on a video feed in the same way that they are. And we never spoke about any of this.
Don't you think that speaks to our larger place we are in society and our anxieties about surveillance, how we're comforted by the thought that if there's a burglary in the neighborhood, you go to the little next door and ask if anybody has
How's the Ring camera?
Right,
Did you get
exactly.
it on the
Did
Ring
you get
camera?
the porch pirate? But in this case, it brings out a deeper anxiety, I think. And also, I was thinking about this reading it. They both, in both stories, the heroes, they sacrifice themselves in a way to stay away from their family. I mean,
They do, yeah.
Ryan's girlfriend and daughter, she wants to be with him, and he keeps pushing her away. Nick Mason's ex-wife she's remarried, and she's it's the next situation.
It's a heartbreaking thing for him because he knows that she's better off
but
in this new life, aside from the people who are waiting nearby. But for his daughter, I mean, think about that. I have two kids, and that's all you do as a writer. Sometimes you just ask, what if?
Mm-hmm.
What if I was this person? And I had this, it doesn't matter what they do or how they got there. We're all people. We all have that same feeling about our family and about our kids. And I just, if you can really tap into that feeling, you can really make it work.
yeah, it's both stories. The families feel very real, very three-dimensional. I heard somebody once say that the problem in romantic comedy and in romances in modern Western society in America is that what keeps the lovers apart? It's not the Romeo and Juliet, the two houses in a feud. What stops somebody in 21st century America from saying, that's my guy, I'm going to marry him? You found a way in a thriller to make sure that.
Well, we went through a lot to torture our characters, but it's true. There's a lot at stake for both our characters and their families, knowingly or unknowingly. That's always the thing about. I taught myself how to write mystery novels. Don't read my first two books because it's really obvious that I was teaching myself how to do it. But the thing is that I'll always remember hearing is just raise the stakes. Mm-hmm. Raise the stakes. And what's the highest stakes you can have personally? I mean, there's the blowing up the country and terrorist attack, but the thing, what's the closest thing to us? Family, right? And whenever I want to raise the stakes, that's usually what I do. It's about family.
It's so terrible and so effective.
He taught me how to do that.
No. Yeah, and for Nick, because in this book, he is so far away from his family. That's why I thought it was important to. I mean, the whole idea of the title, an honorable assassin, he's still trying to hold on to that one piece of humanity that just not totally lose himself in this job. And while he's out on the street, he sees this girl who's about the same age as his daughter. Belani is her name. And she doesn't speak a word of English. He can't communicate with her, but he just sees something. This girl all by herself on a busy city street selling sunglasses, and he tries to imagine, God, if my daughter was out by herself on a street selling sunglasses, I would have 3 heart attacks and a stroke, but that's the way the life is there. And so he can't help but try to help this girl, and it ends up sort of backfiring when he tries to give her money, because that's, somebody else takes, it's this whole thing. So now he's got this, he's on the other side of the world trying to kill somebody. And his biggest worry is this girl on the street. I thought that was an important way to sort of balance all this horror that he's going through, and there's still this little piece of humanity.
I thought that was the most effective way to show that he is trying to hold on to his humanity and his desperation, and how in his competent job here, he's going to play on this whole mission to take out this terrorist kingpin. And he keeps blundering with trying to do the right thing because for his own reasons, and because he does have this core of compassion for this kid. But even though the Indonesians that he's working with say, this is not America, don't do this, please, you're going to make things worse for her, he won't stop himself from doing it, and he does keep making things worse for her.
He does, yeah. So, but that just pulls him in deeper because he has to fix it.
What's amazing is the parallels between the books, because although it doesn't happen in this book, in Blind to Midnight, it's the second book in the series. In the first book, you find out, and it's mentioned in this book. Now Nick finds out he has a daughter he didn't know about. But when he was in Afghanistan, there was an unofficial interpreter attached to his unit, kind of a gopher, and also translator, but not officially, who had a daughter. And the father was put on a death list by the Taliban. And the daughter comes to Nick and asks him to help his father when they're leaving. And he can't. He goes to his commanding officer, and the officer, he's not official. We can't do anything to help him. And instead of the father being murdered, they murder the daughter. So for Nick, it resonates really hard when the thought of anything happening to his daughter resonates from what happened to him in Afghanistan. So there's that similarity. We all learn to write. We write different books, but we know how to do it, and I think that shows through here.
Well, yeah. You talked about stakes. You're writing thrillers. Thrillers have to thrill. You've got to drive forward, and you've got to throw your characters into situations where their vast experience and skills are put to the limit and exceeded in a lot of.
Right. The skills can't be enough.
Right.
Right. The skills can't be enough because it'd be a boring book.
Right.
Tell us about Jakarta. How did you settle on that, other than when you were in the second book?
Well,
you picked it
let's
out
see.
of
I was born and raised there. Oh, wait a minute. No, I
Not
think
Chicago, Jakarta.
I already said Detroit, didn't I? I think it's we sort of talked about this for a moment while we were having a very, very nice dinner, but there are some writers who write about a place, but only after they leave it. Like, I didn't write about Michigan until I was gone, and I could look back at it and see, oh, that's what made it what it was, what makes it different from New York. And James Joyce didn't write about Ireland until he was gone, and Nabokov didn't write about Russia until he was gone, and was looking back at it. And then there are some writers who write about places that they'd never been, and we were talking about that. Like, Shakespeare wrote, how many plays did he write that were set in Italy? He never stepped foot in that country.
I wonder if he ever was in Denmark.
Oh yeah, exactly. And Saul Bellow wrote a novel set in Africa, and Kafka wrote a book set in America, places they'd never been, because they use that setting as sort of a blank slate, and they fill it in with some imagination and some detail, however it comes to them. These days, it's a little bit easier to get those details because you can be an armchair traveler a little bit easier these days. This is all my fancy way of saying that I have not been to Jakarta yet. I'm going to go there. I was going to go there. I mean, things like COVID and the world closing down and all this stuff happening, and my brother who has been there, telling me, no, don't go there, just don't, you know. But I'm going to, because I want to see if I got it right, because it's a strange feeling. I feel like I've taken on this place that I didn't know anything about, and even and writing about Nick, who's a Chicago guy. When he crosses that, there's a strait that goes from Indonesia to Singapore, which is a whole different world. I mean, you've seen Crazy Rich Asians.
No, that's completely different.
Yeah,
place.
Singapore is just Las Vegas of the East. I mean, it's just this emerald city. It's so different from Indonesia. And for Nick, who grew up on the south side of Chicago, to him in that moment, it felt like he was going to the north side of Chicago, which is like the most obscure little weird reference, but it just came to me. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly how it would feel like for him, going to Wrigley Field instead of, Sox Park. And
Yeah, I thought that was a great way to put it, because you want to make Nick is a fish out of water. He's so out of water that
Right.
he's like desiccated in some ways.
yeah, and that helps me a little bit to write about somebody who feels that way, instead of, I wouldn't have taken on, okay, here's somebody who was a native, who did know the place.
Right.
That would have been kind of tough to do.
Yeah, and he has to resent it at first because he's been forced into this situation. But he doesn't come off like a tourist, and the story certainly does not come off like you had read through like a photo or so, a guidebook to learn about it. And I thought it was a great way for him to suddenly realize that he identifies with
Right.
Jakarta by saying Singapore is like the north side of Chicago.
Exactly,
It's like
yeah.
Wrigley Field and their nicely manicured grass. But he wants to be back at Comiskey Park, and that's Jakarta, so he's happy to go home.
Yet another technique that we all use is the fish out of water, the
Right.
stranger in the strange land thing, because we've all experienced that feeling. Even on a small level, you go to a city you've never been to before, and you feel like it has tourist written on your back. You see that. I mean, believe me, in New York, you see that all the time. You know how you can tell tourists in New York? New Yorkers never look up, right? Tourists are always doing this. No, and my Nick is, strangely enough, he is caught in strangely enough in between two worlds. One of the reasons he got this job is the woman he dated since he was 16 years old, who's the mother of the child he didn't know about. She's wealthy. She lives in Sutton Place. And so one of Nick's qualities is that he was in that world for a while. He never enjoyed it. He fought against it. But as his handler says to him, sometimes we need to have somebody who knows the difference between the dinner fork and the salad fork, And so not any cop could do his job. Even a good cop couldn't necessarily do his job. It would have to be someone who was exposed to both, poverty and wealth. And so he's sometimes a stranger in a strange land, even if he knows that land.
And both your guys, they have, I don't want to call it a team, they have frenemies, allies who they don't know whether they can trust. It's an interesting crew. Ryan has assembled a lot of them. He's got a handler, but
Yes.
he's assembled some other guys,
Yeah,
and they are New York characters.
Yeah, well, Nick, when he was in uniform, saves a gentleman out of a fire who's scarred by the fire, Lenny, who holds patents in data manipulation. And so he's like kind of the girl with the dragon tattoo for
Except he lives in the
he
basement
of a
of
synagogue
yeah.
synagogue. He lives in the basement of a synagogue, which of course that's one of the things that makes New York a good place. Not likely to happen in Jakarta, but so, and he has an ex-British operative, an Irishman who's an ex-British operative who, when the troubles kind of calmed down in Northern Ireland, he was going to be gotten rid of. So he, changes his identity and comes to New York, and Nick finds him out. So he does. He has this little team of, but he trusts Lenny, but that's the only guy he trusts out of all of the people he's kind of assembled, because he realizes that people have their own motives and their own reasons, and Nick can't trust that they will always side with him.
And Mason finds himself with the team he's never laid eyes on before, knows nothing about, except that they're all deadly and perhaps duplicitous.
Yeah.
My family is
Yes.
in your book.
In the first book, when you first meet Nick Mason, one of the first things you find out about him is that he's got this set of rules that he lives by. And rule number one, literally number one, is never work with strangers. Strangers either put you in prison or they put you in the ground. That's rule number one. So here he is on the first page of this book. He gets off the plane, and he's got this group of strangers who hustle him right in. He's still jet lagged, and they hustle him right into this first attempt to try to take this guy out, because there's this opportunity, this window that opened up. And, this is everything that Nick knows is just wrong. This is not how you do it. But he does, he has no choice. He goes along with it. He goes to this place where he's going to try to do this, and he realizes right away, these people don't care if I get out of here alive. In fact, it might be kind of convenient if I didn't. That might solve more than one problem if I take this guy out and I get taken out too. So,
and it's a luxury hotel in this beautiful
the very
tropical
first thing,
grounds,
right?
yeah.
And so that's one of the struggles he has in this book, is that these people who are part of this organization and who are killers, it's not a good work environment, to put it mildly. We've all been in places had jobs where you don't necessarily think the people you work with have your best intentions, and this is like the most extreme example of that ever.
That happened to me at Baskin Robbins, actually.
Okay, I think we've been kind of going into the characters and all this, trying to avoid too many spoilers, because the twists and turns in both these novels are so delicious that I don't want to give anything away. So maybe are we ready to open it up for questions for anybody here? Sure? Y'all?
Yes. So I have to ask.
Yes.
Because there was a gap.
Yeah, you could say that.
The second one.
Yeah. Well, he got on the plane.
It was a long flight.
A very long flight. He got off in Jakarta. It was a little longer than I thought
Delta
it would be.
didn't, and they did not give him miles or a refund
That's
or
right.
anything.
That's right. Why did it take so damn long?
Well, not only that, but in now getting it
Yeah.
out there, did you have to go back and make any changes because of the time lapse?
I think it was just, life kind of happened, and this was the last time I was here. How much has the world changed since the last time I was right here in this store? It was 2018, and who would have thought that the world would shut down? And for a couple years, book selling was completely disrupted. Not here. Okay, well,
Never
good.
at the Poison
Never
Pen.
at the Poison Pen.
Never at the Poison Pen. All right.
This is Arizona, and Arizona is not compliant in many ways.
Okay, I don't. All right, that's.
As long as we didn't have 15 employees, Arizona was okay if we kept working. And in fact, the streaming that we're doing is an outgrowth
That's right. That's exactly right. Because that's how a lot of places had to do it. I did a book with Janet Ivanovich after that, just because I had the chance to work with her, and it was a blast, and the book was a blast, and it was a lot of fun. It was called The Bounty. It was, and I say this with kindness. It was crazy. It was a crazy book. It was,
and the
it was
sequel's
nuts.
The Mutiny on the Bounty. Is that
But it was nothing but fun, and nothing but rewarding in a couple ways. You can fill in the blanks, but it was, but that was right during COVID, and so I did a couple events with Janet Ivanovich, having never been in the same room with her, because she'd be in her place in Hawaii, and I'd be in New York, and we'd be sitting in front of a laptop, and the bookstore in Michigan or wherever would just be the owners of the bookstore in an empty store, and that was the book, So everything got kind of weird, and we all found our way through it in our own way. And for me, it probably, it took longer than I thought, but I'm glad to be back. Here I am.
We all
Yeah.
are glad you're back.
Where would I be if you weren't here? I mean, just me and Meg.
I was really cracked up listening to Steve talk about the north and south side of Chicago, because when I was a child, quite young in point of fact, my parents were perfectly okay if we got on the North Shore train
Mhm.
and we went from Winnetka to Wrigley Field. My father would not take us to Comiskey Park. It was so dangerous to go to
Right.
the south side. So I think, well, I went to Cubs games for years. I think I only went once to a White Sox game the entire time I went there. And you're right, it was a big divide.
Yeah, it was. It is, and still is. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't go to Yankee games because I hate the Yankees. No, but the same sort of things exist in New York. Except what's strange is where my kids lived for a while in Williamsburg, right? When I was growing up, you didn't go to Williamsburg. So in New York, things churn. Real estate churns in New York because it's small. Area-wise, not tiny, but it's surrounded by water, and neighborhoods just churn. So places that 20 years ago you would never think of are now the coolest neighborhoods in the world. Though
Yeah, Williamsburg is considered
Right,
v-
yeah.
hipster central.
in
It's like a
France,
gravitational
yeah,
pull.
apparently in France, if you call something Brooklyn, it's very cool.
Well, I'm glad my son is part of the North Brooklyn Runners, and he leads their weekend run over the Williamsburg Bridge. And I'm glad that as his mother, I don't have to worry
Right.
about
No,
him
not
being
anymore.
safe there. All right.
Right.
All right. Good. Other questions?
And this is good for both of you. What's your writing process like? Say when you're writing the sequel, do you like outline everything, or do you kind of like not know where it's going?
Outline. The only time I ever outlined, by the way, was when I was working with Michael. I've never outlined. Never outlined.
Would that kind of like take the fun out of it? You think-
For me,
Tell us what. No, I'm curious. What is it that
Well, for me,
Yeah.
why I don't outline? Why? Because I feel like I'm writing the book twice, and I don't want to write the book twice. And I've always felt that if I'm surprised by what happens next, the reader will be surprised by what happens next. But I'm not one of those people who says you shouldn't outline, because we know people who outline. Do you outline?
I outline?
Yeah, and it works. See, and we all know Jeffrey Deaver, who writes these copious, single-spaced outlines. Long outlines, because he feels he can't write the book unless he knows what's going to happen next. So, right, if it works, and I've taught writing. I taught writing at Hofstra University, and what I would tell my students is, if it works, it works. If it works for you, it works.
Yeah.
Right.
If I try to be surprised with my writing, I find myself I'm surprised to look like I've walked off a cliff. There's nothing underneath me.
Yeah.
Steve, how about you?
I've done it both ways, and I've always wanted to have an outline. I remember starting out. I said, I wish I had an outline because then I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. And there was, we were talking, one of the guys that you love here, I'm sure, is William Kent Kruger, one of the nicest guys in the world, great writer. I was talking to him once, and he said that he sat in a restaurant, as he does every morning. That's a very Minnesota thing to do, It's like, and he looked out the window, and his next 3 books all came to him at once. And by the time he got up from the table, he had outlined all 3 of them. And he knew exactly where the next 3 books would go, just highs, lows, where it would stop, where it would end, and then what had to happen next into the second book and into the third book. He had the next 3 years of his life all mapped out for himself in just that one morning sitting at the thing. And I remember thinking, if you weren't the nicest guy in the world,
You'd hate his guts.
I would strangle you with my bare hands right now.
Or you'd have Nick Mason do it.
Yeah, somebody. Because
I want to go to that.
I know. It's like, what are they
Is this
served there?
restaurant?
What is with these pancakes in Minnesota?
I was trained to write as a poet. So I think my lack of liking outlines is because I was trained as a poet. No, I never took a prose writing class. So, and the first long piece of fiction I ever wrote was published as my first novel. So I didn't, that was just I stumbled upon, like many of my characters, how to do it. And I've done okay. So it works for me. But I would never tell somebody you should do it the way I do it. You should do it the way Kent Kruger does it.
That's right.
And I gotta say, people try to divide writers into do you plan it out? Do you just write by the seat of your pants? People who can do that, I think you're not stumbling blindly. I think if you can write an entire novel, that makes sense. It means that you have a really strong understanding of how a good story develops and is structured, and you're somewhere intuitively that's churning away as you figure out what's happening on the page. Yeah.
Do you revise? Do you revise a lot? Like, number of drafts?
No, it's like revealed knowledge. No, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think people who are pantsers or people who do it our way revise like crazy.
Anyone read your first draft?
I don't have first. I only have one draft because I edit so much.
Oh, you edit while you're going.
I edit
Well, okay.
while I'm
All right,
going.
all right.
Like there are people who get it all out
Right.
and then go back.
I have to
and
get it all out.
Yeah. See,
I've gotta get it out,
yeah. This is gonna look like it's like a chewing tobacco convention in here. No, I revise like crazy. I mean, like the first 50 pages of one of my books, I have read hundreds of times and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked because I think the beginnings of books are really important. And once you get to 50 pages, once I get to 50 pages, there's momentum, and I know where I'm going. But I revise like crazy. Most of my editors say that I give them the cleanest manuscripts they've ever gotten because I polish them.
And then you put the apple on their
Right,
desk.
right.
Yes.
Right.
Steve, how about you?
Yeah, no, yeah, of course. I mean, writing is rewriting. That's the oldest adage. And you never really know what you've got until you've. I mean, it's interesting when you said you only have one draft. I mean, that's. I think James Crumley, one of my writing heroes, he said it's like, for him, it's like driving a snowplow. You start pushing the snow and get as far as you can, and then you go all the way back to the beginning of the driveway, and then you ram it, and then you get a little bit farther, and then you will go all the way back. So he keeps going over the same ground every time, pushing it a little bit further, and that was his process. It's always
sounds like what I.
But it's always fascinating how everybody's got something a little different, and you probably couldn't do it anybody else's way.
No, and I would never recommend that somebody do it my way because I'm really working without a net.
Right.
And
And it's weird, and I've actually sort of done it both ways now, so I can sort of see the value of both. But it's like this business of people who get up early in the morning. Like, I mean, just that fact alone. I mean, it's like It's like he gets up and watches the sunrise in this little coffee house.
We got to kill
in
Kruger.
Minnesota. I know we do. It's like what the. I mean, can you imagine getting up before dawn, which I did today, by the way, just to come out here. But I didn't go and sit down and try to write. If I try to write at dawn, oh my God,
No,
forget it.
Matt.
You need to have a cigarette and a blindfold.
Sad to hear, or maybe you'll be delighted to hear that the coffee shop closed during COVID. Now he writes at home at his kitchen counter.
But he still gets up probably early,
And it must
before
be,
dawn
It must
and-
be something about Minnesota
Yeah.
because Matt Goldman gets up at like 3:00 in the morning and starts writing. And it's like, Matt, what are you nuts? What are you going to give us all a bad reputation?
I mean, I'll be up until 3:00
right.
writing. That's a different thing.
Yeah, that's yeah. This is Minnesota. It must be the water. Yeah.
Okay.
So on the average, how long does it take to write a book?
Me, 5 months or less. At one point I was writing my own books, and I was doing the Jesse Stone books for the Robert B. Parker estate. So I was writing 2 books a year and touring 2 books a year. So I had to get very fast at writing. Necessity is amazing. Paychecks and necessity, they're amazing motivators. Yeah. So I have written books in 3 months. Short books.
Your poetry.
No. I've written 80,000 word books in 3 months, but I wouldn't make a habit of it.
Right.
It's hard to do that.
I did do the Janet book in 3 months. The Lock Artist I turned in approximately 2 years late. That's how long. I mean, every book is its own world, and it's
That's where outlining probably comes in really handy.
Outlining has saved me because, as I said, when I tried to just write, especially at the start when I didn't really understand how stories should be structured, I told a friend I was writing a murder mystery, and she read my first draft, and she said, "That's great. Only nobody dies." in this book."
That's the mystery. Yeah. The perfect crime. No one knows it happened.
So the outlining saves me months on the other end of trying to
And-
wade through so many false starts and
And to
dead-
be
dead
perfectly
ends.
accurate, sometimes when I start a book, I know where it's going, right? So I kind of have an idea, or I know what the ending is. But I have started a book by just sitting down and starting to write without having a plot. Like a literary novel, a book without a plot. No, a book in my series, Mo Prager series, called Hurt Machine. I just had an idea in my head. Mo, who's the detective, Mo is sick, and then I had to find the plot once I started writing. And luckily, I say this in a ironic way. In New York about 20 years ago, a pregnant woman stumbled into a restaurant where 2 EMTs were having lunch, and she had a terrible asthma attack, and it was reported that they refused to help her, which was inaccurate. They weren't near their equipment, so they called another ambulance, but by the time that ambulance got there, the woman and the baby were dead. Now, that's a tragedy. It's not a book. 3 months later, one of those EMTs was murdered. That's a book. So the Hurt Machine. So while I was writing from the idea of Mo is sick, this happened. So I had a plot, finally. But I have started books where I just sat down and started writing and see where it went.
Have you started books you never finished?
Have had experiences now writing with other people. So, Meg, we haven't talked much about your work. Your unsub series is your series. But tell us what it was like collaborating over Heat and Heat 2. Now I have it right.
I collaborated on Heat 2, which is the novel, the prequel / sequel to the film Heat. No, Heat itself is
Is a
a
movie.
movie, and it's only a movie. It was created as a movie, and Heat 2, yes, and Heat 2 is the prequel / sequel to that, I worked on that with Michael Mann, who had wrote and directed the movie, had created the characters, knew their world. So I was very aware going into the project that it was a big sense of responsibility to honor the story and the characters that he had lived with for so long as we developed the new story and wrote it. So actually, you know what? Working with another person in Word documents was the issue. Was an issue. Document control. Which version do you have? Did I send you this chapter? What's the timestamp on that? Let's make sure that we've all got the correct version, so that nobody's, going over a retread as we do that. It was an exhilarating experience. A lot of work. I've had to bring my A game every single minute that I was working on it, and I was glad that I did have to do that, and it made me a better writer.
And I've collaborated twice on novels. Once with the Irish author Ken Bruin, and we wrote a novel called Tower together. And that
was such a good short novel.
It was a short novel, but boy, that process was tough because Ken. It's too long a story to tell, but just take my word for it. Yeah, take my word for it. It was.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Quite a process. Ken used to send me emails. We'd communicate friend emails, right? Where they'd be yards long, right? And then he asked me to write this novel with him. I said yes immediately. And then I didn't hear from him for months. And 3 months later, he sends me half the book and says, "Have at it, friend." Like, oh, okay, you sent me half the book, okay. No, and then he wouldn't talk to me about it. It's like I had to figure out how to do it, which, again, it was really challenging. It made me a better writer. And it won the McCavity Award.
Yeah.
It was really. I'm very proud of that.
It was
book.
It was really good.
And I wrote a book with a New York City detective called Bronx Requiem, which was an ebook only for Hyperion, and basically, I wrote the whole book. But my most interesting thing was I wrote the Jesse Stone books. With Robert B. Parker, even though he was dead, I read all the so it's funny. I had to read the canon. So not only did I read his books, but I read Michael Brandman's books, who took over the series afterwards, and I had to find a balance of what readers who love the series expected. And I also had to do what was true not only to the characters, but true to me as a writer. Because it was in third person, I could get away with it. Ace Atkins wrote Spencer, which is in first person, and he had to sound just like Parker. So it was a very different experience. And like Meg said, it challenges you. Writers need challenges, and it made me a much better writer. Oh, I don't know. I can't, because we were friends. Because I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you that this is so Ken, because he had written 2 books with Jason Starr, and he felt he was insulting me by not asking me, so he said, "Let's write a book together," and I was fine with that. I was great, sure, let's try it, and then I got the email with half the book. Have at it, bro. Okay, thanks, Ken. How do I do this? Have at it, bro. That was it. That was it.
Yeah, and that's a good insight. It is a different kind of challenge because you're writing in somebody else's world here. You're like the guest. You're like the guest star.
But you found that somebody has to be the boss, right? even if they don't act the boss, someone has to be the person to be the final arbiter
of course.
of what.
Well, yeah, and in the case of Heat 2, I went into it completely open about these were Michael's characters, his original ideas and material, and we were going to wrestle this thing into shape and develop it as it went along, and I've been thrilled with the way.
And this is another
responded
really
to
good
it.
book, by the way.
Thank you.
I mean, just the writing itself,
Oh, well,
just the
thank you.
style, the writing
That's-
style,
that's
just
great.
right. I mean,
I
just the
mean,
language.
It does.
Anybody
It does.
who's read this?
I gotta brag. It does say #1 New York Times.
It was a
bestseller.
number one. That's right. You're the only one in this table who has been a number one.
That's right, you're Hurless. This is-
Right.
Do we have time for one last question here?
Sorry.
Is that the monsoon
No,
giving
yeah,
us,
yeah, that's right.
giving
It's
us a
the-
message that's coming
it's,
back?
It's the hurricane.
Flooding.
one, yeah,
Don't
that's
go
right.
outside.
I have books from your publisher to give away, so I'm going to go find them. You keep talking for just a minute.
All right.
Okay.
We got giveaways. Okay.
Giveaways. So aren't you glad you came?
Just made that comment that you haven't had #1 bestseller.
We've both had bestsellers,
But not
but
number one.
Number one is like number one.
Just,
Just her. Yeah.
there's a
And
reason
that was
she's
my,
interviewing.
that was my 16th
Yeah. Right. Right.
that I'd worked on. Yeah. So that has been published. Let me say that. There are the other ones that I took out in the back
We
and
don't talk about those.
and strangled and buried where the dog couldn't dig them up.
So you
Because
have written books that never
Yes.
saw the light of day?
yeah, and that we made the mistake of like giving it to our a best friend to read, and then they kept the copy of it. And Susan, if you're watching, I'm gonna get it back. No, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I published this Blind to Midnight is my 32nd novel, but I've written 35 novels. 3, and the ones that didn't get published shouldn't have gotten published. So
But it was still worth doing it.
no, every
Exactly,
writing. I always
exactly.
told my students, there's no such thing as wasted writing. There's no such thing. Every writing you do, even if it's a grocery list, it makes you a better writer.
Do you do a lot of research?
Yes.
Oh, you do a lot of research every time you write?
Yeah, you heard his opinion about that. But yeah. I do. I love it. I could spend too many ages just doing research because it's so much fun. Hey, look at what I get to do. Explore every topic of possible interest to me and what's down this rabbit hole. But you have to know more than you show. You don't want it to sound like you're trying to brag about the books you read or
In fact, that's a real talent when you with writers who do deep research, is not doing info dump, like not
Exactly.
showing off.
Exactly.
Look.
Not dumping your notebook, as
Right,
they say.
here.
It's very easy to do that.
Look how much work I did.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, you want to throw it all in there. I got to work with the best safe cracker in the world when I was doing the lock artist, which was the most fun research, probably. And I had to restrain myself too. I had to not. All I wanted to know is, what does it feel like, Dave? Just tell me what it feels like to see us, to have this safe, and to know that you can open it, and you don't have to blow it up, you don't have to crack it open, you don't have to drill it and cut it with a torch, but you just have the skill to just figure out the secret of this one safe, and that's all he does. That's his life. And it's just, what does it feel like? And that's what I wanted to know, because that's the part you want to get right.
Hope you write a sequel to that too. Are you still planning it?
I would love, yes, I gotta.
The locks and bagel artist.
No, like-
On that note, Barbara, you have.
So Steve was too modest to tell you that he's won 2 Edgar Awards. You're one of the few multiple Edgar Award winners, and one was in fact for The Lock Artist, and the other was for your first book. Right. And Reed, you've won all kinds of awards. I
Yes,
can't
it's
even
cost
remember.
me. It's cost me a lot of money. I'm the Susan Lucci of the Edgar Awards. I've been nominated for 4 Edgars in 3 different categories, but not a winner.
But haven't you won other though?
Oh, I've
thought
won the
Anthony
Seamus
and
Awards.
Seamus and other.
I won the I won the authors on the Sleepless City the first in this series.
Right.
Won Authors on the Air Best Book of the Year. I've won the Scribe Award, the Audio Award, the Anthony, the Barry, 4
See?
Seamus Awards.
I know.
You
So
know.
starstruck. Do we want to include you in this star-studded group?
Yeah, I won the Edgar Award for China Lake, the first novel in my
That's right.
Edmund Delaney series.
So it's
So-
rare. It's actually fairly rare that you would see 3 authors, all of whom have won the major mystery award. Well, not the major, but a major mystery award from the Mystery Writers of America. And it's named after Edgar Allan Poe. And it's a very strange little statue because, and the reason I
It's
know
more like
this-
David Niven. I've always thought it looks like.
So I was fortunate enough to win the 2 awards that the Mystery Writers of America give you if you're not a writer. One of which is called the Raven Award, and the other is, I'm trying to remember, is it the Ellery Queen? I think it is, for editing, and the Raven Award for being a bookseller. And when I was in New York and got the Raven Award, when I went up there, they handed me an Edgar, and they said, we forgot to order the Raven, so you can have an Edgar and take it home. And so I did, in fact, take the Edgar home. And about 10 years later, Marjorie wrote to me and she said, we finally remembered to order your Raven, she said, and we want you to send the Edgar back. And I said, what Edgar? I know. I mean, I wasn't going to give it up. Partly because it's just this quirky. I'm not using the weird word, right? It's a quirky little statue of, and Edgar Allan Poe was kind of a quirky looking guy, if I recall. So there we are.
Looks
So
like
I want to
David Niven.
thank Blackstone Publishing, who is the publisher of all 3 of these authors and who has kindly sent us giveaways for our party tonight. And so we put them on the chairs there so you could pick your own, because otherwise I'm not sure which one you might like, but help yourself. There should be one for everybody here, which would be great. And if you would like to get your book signed by the authors, I'm trying to think. That's not really going to work so well with all 3 of you there. Maybe we should migrate back to that little table and I'll run back there and clear it off. How's that? So thank you all very much for coming tonight. Virtual audience, thank you very much.
Thank
And
you for coming. And
I
thank
hope
thank
you won't
Meg.
have to actually
Meg, thank
swim
you.
home.
That's a
Right. So great job.
Thanks, guys.